that with your curriculum vitae that you've given to us, you should go to the Ministry of Finance. The following.
Order, please.
Looking at the budgetary system of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, as it currently were, we have a budget where we have over 78% of the total budget in financing recurrent expenditure, and just a paltry sum of 22% in financing the capital expenditure. Will you support, one, the reduction in the number of agencies from 601 to 106 as proposed by the Oronsaye panel report? Two, will you agree that the recurrent expenditure should be reduced at the expense of the capital expenditure? Three, with the burden of looking for finances in financing the capital expenditure of this country, and it is put before you that there is need for us to deregulate the downstream sector, will you support, and why? Four, looking at the Treasury single account, which in what is contained in your CV, that is something that you have already started implementing as a state. And looking at the line of the budgetary expenditure of the federal government, which is divided into three. One, there are agencies of the government that are fully funded by the nation budget. Two, there are agencies of the government that are partly funded by the federal budget. And three, there are agencies that are self-financing. How will you implement the Treasury single account? Five, I put it before you, Mrs. Kemi Adeosun, going through your CV and your duty as the Honorable Minister of Commissioner for Finance in Ogun State, I noticed that while recommending for the state various sources of financing, what is ascribed to be the cheapest source of financing, that is approaching the capital market, you are silent on it. Your state have not taken advantage of this market. Is it that your position is that you don't support that state or the federal government should approach this market in financing their capital expenditure, knowing fully well that the interest element charge cannot be compared
Put the question.
with that of banks? Sir?
Put the question.
Yeah, these are my questions. I'm putting the question.
The last question. Put the last question.
The last question. Will you support and recommend to the Federal Executive Council the use of capital markets in financing the budgets of the Federal Republic of Nigeria? Lastly, Mr. Chairman, I would like to rest my case. Thank you.
Mrs. Adeosun, you take the question. Any other you prefer?
Thank you. Thank you very much, distinguished Senator. Senator Wamako's question about IGR and the role of IGR at the federal level. As we all know, the oil price has fallen. In fact, yesterday it closed below $50. And we had been getting oil at as high as 110. Now, oil represents just 9% of our GDP, but it represents 75% of government revenue. So what that's telling us is that the majority of the economy is not actually contributing much to government revenues. So IGR, non-oil revenues, which is what we're really talking about, become absolutely critical. So we need now to implement strategies to improve our IGR, to improve our collections. And that's something I was involved in and we did in Ogun State, where we moved the IGR from 750 when we came in and we went as high as 6 billion. It's come down a little bit now with the economy slowing down. But it can be done. It's about mapping all the processes, seeing where the money is leaking and plugging those leakages. And that's what needs to be done, and it needs to be done very urgently across all government. All revenue generating agencies of government need to be part of that process. The other thing is we need to chase out cash. Everywhere that people transact in cash, there are leakages. So we need to ensure that we engage technologies and different channels of collection so that people are not paying cash, because wherever in our culture we tend to send people to do things for us. If you do it yourself through electronic channels, the money doesn't leak. So government revenue as a percentage of GDP in Nigeria is just 5%. The standard in developing economies is 20%. So we need to set ourselves very aggressive targets to plug the leakages and to get in additional non-oil revenue. And that will help us to deal with the oil price, the effects of the oil price decline. The question about my representing the diaspora, I think yes, I do, and I'm very proud of that. I think the diaspora have a huge role to play in any developing economy. If you look at Israel, their diaspora are a huge part of their economy. If you look at Ireland, which became the Celtic Tiger, the Irish in America supported them. We have Nigerians in virtually every country of the world, and they can support us through diaspora bonds, financing. They can also support us with skills, and I think that it's an asset we need to harness. And so I'm very happy to be referred to as diaspora. Senator Hassan's question, that the CBN governor said we are potentially heading for recession unless we take certain steps. We're not in recession, we're in slowdown. And actually the GDP is still positive. And it's, even though oil's contribution is negative, the GDP is still growing. So that tells us that the non-oil sector is growing. And if we can harness that, we can actually come out of the problems. And where is the growth? The growth is in agriculture, the growth is in services, the growth is in trade. So if we put policies in place to support that growth, we can avoid recession. And what are the policies that we need to look at? We need to consider most of the growth, and it must be inclusive growth, because we need to create jobs. That's a huge commitment that this administration has made, that it will be inclusive growth that creates jobs, that creates wealth. And the biggest creator must be the private sector. We cannot continue to grow the size of the public sector. It's got to be the private sector. So we need to look at what are the constraints, what are the things that are causing businesses not to grow. The biggest challenge, I believe, is our infrastructure. We need to invest heavily in infrastructure to generate business and to link areas of the nation that have advantage but can't turn it into money, can't monetize it. And that infrastructure is power. That infrastructure is rail, that infrastructure is road. For as long as it is cheaper to move a container of tomato paste from Amsterdam to Lagos than it is to move it from Kano to Lagos, we are not going to be competitive, we are not going to create jobs. And the constraints are around infrastructure. So we need to stimulate our economy by investing heavily in infrastructure, and that will get the growth, and that will hopefully help us to avoid recession. On the TSA, we actually introduced TSA in Ogun State in 2011. We had over 500 bank accounts, and we were borrowing. We would go to the banks for overdrafts. When we consolidated our accounts, firstly, we found over 2 billion naira. Some of it had been dormant for 10 years, 20 years. So the first thing we did, we recovered a lot of money, and I know that the federal government too has recovered a huge amount of money. The other thing that happens as a result of the TSA is that it reduces our borrowing costs, because suddenly, instead of borrowing, we became lenders. In fact, we were earning interest on the money. And I'm sure the federal government, I saw the Q1 2015 figures, it's positive. Rather than the government being a net borrower short term, it's now a net lender. Now, what is the effect of that on the economy? The effect on that on the economy is, if government is not borrowing as much, interest rates should come down. And if interest rates are coming down, then businesses can borrow and be able to compete. So it's absolutely important. The TSA is an absolutely very important economic tool that we all need to support. Now, the question about the effect on the banks, I would say the banks are not in business to sit on government money. The banks are in business to go out and lend to the real sector. So when they're no longer having